Welcome to this presentation on Ukraine REACH and more specifically the pre-registration process. So topics discussed today in this video, I will give you a quick overview of REACHLaw, so providing a presentation on REACHLaw in brief. Then we'll look at the Ukraine REACH registration process and more of the basics of that process, and then we'll look into the pre-registration and registration timeline, the joint submission concept, and then we'll dive into the pre-registration process by looking at going from the pre-registration to the registration part, and then specifically the pre-registration process, so how we envisage that happening. As well as, of course, looking at the information requirements and the submission process. And at the end, of course, you will find our contact details. So, to give a quick overview of REACHLaw, so we provide support for REACH and REACH-like chemical regulations globally. So this obviously now also covers Ukraine REACH, which will be the topic of this presentation. But on top of that, we also provide, of course, support for EU REACH, UK REACH, Turkey, KKDIK, K-REACH, KARSHA, and also the India BIS regulation. India REACH is not in force yet, and that's in a undetermined status at the moment, so we'll look at that when it enters into force. But as said, today Ukraine REACH will be the focus, and for Ukraine REACH we are providing services through our local office in Kyiv, Ukraine, which is the newest subsidiary of the REACHLaw group. So I'm Fredrik Johansson. I'm presenting from here from Helsinki in Finland, the head office, and will be your guide through this presentation today. Mentioning REACHLaw services pertaining to Ukraine REACH and Ukraine CLP. So we provide, for example, only representative services through our local office in Kyiv. We also obviously take care of all the regulatory processes pertaining to Ukraine REACH. Now in the beginning it's pre-registration, then a bit later on it's the registration process, whether it's co-registration or lead registration. Later on also like authorization work and so forth, but that's something to be determined still. We of course then also take care of safety data sheet authoring, take care of CLP notifications. That's a subject for a different video, as well as labels, managing the REACH consortia and SEEF pertaining to lead registration work, for example. And of course, when it comes to registration, taking care of both regular and simplified registration processes. And those will also be discussed in a separate video later. So now we'll go into the main part of this presentation, which is of course Ukraine REACH and more specifically pre-registrations. So just wanted to note that some aspects of Ukraine REACH in general are still a bit unclear, and therefore some parts of this presentation is, I would say, speculative to some degree. So please keep this in mind. Things are changing, and we'll keep you up to date on that on our website, and of course on upcoming webinars and so forth. And this presentation that you will see here is based on the latest legal text, related documents, and of course discussions that we've had with Ukrainian authorities on the subject. So let's go into the Ukraine REACH registration process and look at the basics, because that will explain to you how the pre-registration process sits in those processes. So, as with EU REACH, the scope is significant because all substances, unless specifically exempt, are within the scope of the Ukraine REACH regulation. Then there are specific additional exemptions from parts of the processes of the Ukraine REACH regulation, such as the registration requirement. And these are, as said, the same as for EU REACH. So if you've worked with EU REACH requirements and wondered what is within the scope or what's not within the scope and what's exempted and what's not, then the same applies for Ukraine REACH. So you can say that most substances are within the scope and will also require a registration and a pre-registration before that. We will not go into the depth of the specifics of what substances are and are not exempt in this presentation. So the basic requirements to register is the same as for EU REACH, so all in Ukraine manufactured or into Ukraine imported substances as such, or as part of mixtures, obviously, at 1 ton or more annually, must be Ukraine REACH pre-registered and then registered by the applicable registration deadlines that are dependent on the toxicity of the substance, hazards of the substance, and the tonnage band of the substance. We'll look at that actually in more detail in the registration part video, but we will also quickly look at that in the next slide. The registration tonnage bands, again, the same as for EU REACH, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, and over 1,000 ton. The higher the tonnage band, the higher the data requirements. So again, same as EU REACH. A lot of repetition here about saying about it's same as EU REACH because it is very similar. Registration types are the same, again, full substance, but you can also register it as an on-site isolated intermediate. They also have to be under strictly controlled conditions. And if you register it as a transported isolated intermediate, it also have to be under strictly controlled conditions through the whole life cycle of the substance, so through the whole supply chain. Again, similar and same requirements as under EU REACH, you could say. So if we look at the timeline for pre-registration and registration, today, late October 2024, we are still in the implementation phase. So in a separate video we talk about when Ukraine REACH has been approved and when it enters into force, but here you can also see that it will enter into force on the 23rd of January 2025, so next year. And starting with the pre-registration phase. So this is the phase which lasts for 1 year, 12 months, in other words, from the 23rd of January 2025 all the way until 23rd of January 2026. So this is the pre-registration window of 1 year during which you should pre-register your substances that require registration under Ukraine REACH. Who does this is, of course, then a matter of who is taking care of Ukraine REACH compliance, but we'll talk about only representation in a separate video also, so please have a look at that. Once the substances have been pre-registered, then the registration phase starts, and the higher tonnage band substances and the more nastier substances, if you will have a first registration deadline, 1st of October 2026. So over 1,000 ton substances, over 1 ton CMR substances, over 100 ton very toxic to aquatic organisms substances. Same again as under EU REACH, for example, and other REACH-like regulations. But then for the slightly lower tonnage bands, you have more time to register. So for 100 to 1,000 tons, the registration deadline will be 1st of June 2028. So 1st of June 2028. And then for even the lowest tonnage bands, 1 to 10, 10 to 100 ton substances, you will have all the way until 1st of March 2030 to register these substances, all the way to 1st of March 2030 to register these substances. We'll talk about late pre-registration in a bit. So, but it is possible to late pre-register substances that you're placing on the Ukrainian market for the first time after this pre-registration deadline of 23rd of January 2026. We'll come back to that in a couple of slides. Again, some basics. So also the joint submission concept applies in Ukraine. So it means that you have a joint submission. Everyone is part of the joint submission through which the lead registrant submits the core registration data as required by the legal text. So according to the annexes defining the data requirements per registration tonnage band. It is possible to opt out, but we will not cover that in this presentation at this point. It will be a topic for a separate webinar later on. So you can have only one, of course, lead registrant part of the same joint submission. So for the same substance, one substance has one registration in the form of a joint submission where you have one lead registrant submitting the core registration data, and then you have 0 to many co-registrants taking part in this joint submission and providing data and sharing costs and so forth. And all of this is then submitted to the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine. We'll just call it MEPR in these presentations. So if we look at the process from pre-registration to registration, so if you are manufacturing in or importing into Ukraine 1 ton or more of a non-exempt substance, then per legal entity you will have to pre-register by this deadline of 23rd of January 2026. Once you are pre-registered, you will become a member of a pre-SIF. And SIF stands for Substance Exchange Information Exchange Forum. Substance Information Exchange Forum or Fora, depend on how you want to have it. And this constitutes the pre-registration process. This will be something that we'll discuss today. From here, you go forward in the process and will be discussed in a separate video. You agree on the substance sameness, select the lead registrant, and then your pre-SIF essentially becomes a SIF where you have the potential registrants, early registrants and data holders who are aiming to then participate in the same joint submission and have the lead registrant submit the core data for the substance in a lead dossier. And this is the registration process, and which will be covered in a separate video. So now let's go into the pre-registration process in more detail. So all substances subject to Ukraine REACH registration must first be pre-registered when placing these on the Ukrainian market upon entry into force of the Ukraine REACH regulation. So as we see on the picture, in the picture to the right, it will enter into force. A bit of repetition here, but January 23rd next year, 25, and the pre-registration process is, as said, 12 months long, so 1 year exactly. So you need to, if you are now, for example, placing chemicals on the Ukrainian market at 1 ton or more annually, then these substances are subject to the pre-registration requirement, unless they're of course specifically exempt from the registration process or the regulation as a whole. But we will assume in this presentation that now all substances we are discussing are of course within the scope of the registration requirement under Ukraine REACH. So this 1 year transitional period, meaning the time when you have time to prepare and submit your, or you can prepare it earlier, but you can submit your pre-registrations, is defined in Ukraine REACH articles 140 to 146, And also the Article 145, which is included in this range, also defines this late pre-registration possibility. So it means that if you are placing substances on the Ukrainian market for the first time after the pre-registration deadline, so the 23rd of January 26, but before, of course, the applicable registration deadline, you can late pre-register these substances. So that is possible and is good to have, obviously. We do not have in the regulation as per yet, at least like any cutoff date, like for example we had for EU REACH, which said, for example, that 1 year before, for these low tonnage band substances, that 1 year before the deadline you had to submit your late pre-registration at the latest. But in Ukraine REACH at the moment there is no such definition, so technically, at least as it is now, late pre-registration will continue all the way until the applicable registration deadline. But that remains to be determined, of course, if that sticks as such. So what's included in the pre-registration? Well, again, at the risk of sounding a bit repetitive, it is the same information, more or less, I would say, that we had for EU REACH back in the day. And we are having for Turkey, KKD-IK at the moment, and so forth. So you need to provide information about the substance that you are going to pre-register. So this means the CAS number for the time being, because they don't have INEX numbers per se in use in Ukraine at the moment. So the name of the substance, other identifiers, for example, here you can give the INEX number, list number where applicable, information about the molecular structure and formula, compositional information, purity degrees, concentration, impurities, additives, and so forth. Nanoform was not reported back in the day for EU REACH, but it is here now included in the pre-registration information. So some changes and some updates, obviously, now also manifests itself here in Ukraine REACH. Then, of course, you need to provide information about who is doing the pre-registration, so identification and contact details of the manufacturer, importer, or the only representative. So company details, contact person details, sites that are doing, for example, manufacturing these substances subject to pre-registration and so forth. And also for only representatives, important to note, foreign company details having appointed the only representative. So also you need to provide the principals, contact details, company details, contact person details, and so forth in this pre-registration. Then you are also expected to provide information about the expected registration deadline for the substance. So here again it depends on the hazards of the substance and tonnage band. So 1st of October 26, 1st of January 28, 1st of March 2030. And then you also need to, it says exact annual production or import tonnage of the substance, but we suspect you will need to essentially just pick a tonnage band that you are going to pre-register for. This was the way it was done for EU REACH, for example, and it is currently done for Turkey, KKD-IK, and so forth. And then also, albeit we think this is voluntary, because not in all cases do you have information about applicability for QSAR and read-across substances, similar substances, in other words. So likely it means that do you as a pre-registrant have information on similar substances that can be used for QSAR and read-across purposes? We suspect this will be optional, albeit in the legal text it says that more or less that it sounds like it's mandatory, but we think this will not be. So similar as EU REACH back in the day when you pre-registered, for those who remember that process. So if we look at the submission process, preparation and submission process based, again, like to highlight, based on current information. We suspect and expect the process to be such that, of course, first you have to collect information about the substances that are subject to pre-registration, and you, based on the previous slide where we looked at what is included in the pre-registration, so you collect that information for all the substances that you need to pre-register under Ukraine REACH. And of course, please also keep in mind that if you are very close to the 1 ton threshold, you might want to consider already pre-registering such substances just in case, so that you don't have to worry about when the volume goes over 1 ton to then scramble to do the pre-registration for those substances. So up to you how you do that, but I would say a good practice is to just rather pre-register too many substances than too few. And regarding the practical provision of the pre-registration data, we suspect that you need to provide, and we expect that you will need to first download an Excel template containing more or less fields for all this information you saw in the previous slide. And as I said, it needs to be determined still, but this is what we are think at this moment will happen. And you need to, of course, populate this Excel template with all the information you collected here in the previous step. And of course, check that everything is correctly entered. Then we also expect that you will actually be sending out this filled in Excel template to a dedicated email address that will then likely have an automated reply stating that they have received the submission of the pre-registration. So very manual process and reminiscent of the UK doing notification, at least the Excel part, if for those of you dabbled with UK REACH. And once that is done, we expect that at some point the ministry, the MEPR, will publish on their website information about pre-registered substances and the pre-CF members of these pre-registered substances, so that companies can organize themselves for the purpose of joint submission. So meaning selecting a lead registrant, determining the substance sameness, and so forth. So this will be likely an Excel or some sort of a table, a subset of the information provided here minus confidential information. And then it is up to industry after this process to organize themselves for the purpose of preparing the joint submission. So very straightforward and fairly, let's say, a manual process, but at the moment this is what we expect the process to look like. And very important, of course, to note that there are no authority fees applied to Ukraine REACH pre-registration, so you can pre-register as many substances as you like, and as said, better to pre-register too many than too few. And as there are no authority fees coupled with these pre-registrations, just that is a good thing, and of course enables companies to rather than go ahead and pre-register too many than too few substances. So again, the same as we had for under EU REACH back in the day, and of course currently in Turkey, for example. So as said, the details of the submission process for pre-registration is still a bit up in the air. So please make sure to follow REACHLaw closely on developments of Ukraine REACH and the registration process, but of course also the pre-registration process. So everything starts with the pre-registration, and that will be the focus in the beginning. And if you have the possibility, then of course please feel free to sign up for and subscribe to our newsletter, because we will provide information through that on what's happening with Ukraine REACH, and we will of course have new and webinars where we go into new information and more details coming up. But also feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. as we will also post unique information there, and of course here on YouTube. You will find these webinars and dedicated videos on Ukraine Reach and so forth be posted here fairly regularly also, at least when there's updates coming. And of course, feel free to reach out to REACHLaw for Ukraine region CLP support, and feel free to ask a quotation already today. We have all the details that we need essentially to be able to quote any of this work. So contact us at, for example, sales@reachlaw.fi. Happy to help you with Ukraine region CLP, of course. So that concludes this video. So thank you very much for watching all the way to the end. And here you can find our contact details. So Olesia Winterberg and me, Fredrik Johansson. So feel free to contact either of us for help with Ukraine Reach. So with that said, thank you very much and have a great day.